You know, through the day, we have been having allusions to mental health. We spoke about it with the military. Somebody asked a question. Masaba was talking about, her meltdowns, postpartum depression. We've had Ananya talk about it. And we thought that actually it really needs a conversation of its own, right? And I want to welcome three very special guests. They're from three completely different walks of life. And they have all in their own way shone a light on this conversation that is so important to so many of you. And sometimes older people will say, hey, you young people, you have this language. Hamare time mein to ye hota hi nahi tha, right? But I know many of you are interested in this conversation. Many of us have dealt with mental health challenges in our own way. So we have some extraordinary speakers for you, and I want to, you've been a great audience, but I think this is a really sensitive topic, and I urge more and more of you to ask questions in this panel. I want to first welcome on stage, Niha. She is somebody who's curated one of India's best art fairs, but she's now devoted her life to advocacy for mental health, has a personal story that you're going to hear about. Ah, there you are. Thank you, please. I then want you to put your hands together for somebody who's actually runs and curates the largest youth organization of India. How many of you are affiliated with IIMUN? Many of you are familiar with it, right? Let's hear it for Rishabh Shah. Thank you, please. And actor Kubra side, right? And a lot of people are really excited to meet her. There she is.
Hello. How are you? Thank you.
And I'd like to welcome on stage somebody who actually runs a very successful show based out of Germany, works with Deutsche Welle News. Isha is here, one of our partners on this event. I want you to put our hands together for Isha. I've been on her program. She's absolutely superb, and she's going to be leading this conversation. Thank you. Mics.
There are few out there, but... Yeah.
Oh, okay. I have to thank Barkha for curating this session, because I know it's called We the Women, but mental health is something that does not decide whether you're male or female or you identify yourself as diverse. So we have a nice panel, and I heard backstage the kind of cheers all of you got. Kubra, let's start with you. You've been very vocal about mental health and how you've dealt with it. Now tell me, as an actor, when you have to do a difficult role, I'm sure all roles are difficult, but if you have a character where there's abuse, you're dealing with probably an abusive partner, and you have to show those emotions on your face, in your eyes, how difficult is it as a person? Do you have to dive deep within yourself? Does it bring back any trauma? Or is it that you can really disconnect between the two?
Wow. I didn't know you were going to start from there. So what I've learned and realized in the process of being an actor is that you can't be one if you can't access your emotions. And accessing your emotions can be a very dangerous path. But I remember learning this from one of my directors, Anurag Kashyap, because I felt the first time I didn't know how I was going to cry, which was one of my biggest challenges in my mind before performing the scene. He said, we're going to sit here, we're going to read the lines, we're going to be with ourselves, and we're going to open that window a little bit so that we can let those emotions come in. But before we leave here tonight, we're going to close that window. And I think we all have access to open that window and close it. And that's what keeps us alive, the access to emotions. But then what happens, I believe, is that when you're not an actor and you're just living life, which I do, I'm not always acting, so I'm not opening and closing the window. Sometimes they are floodgates. Sometimes they take over you. And I think with the world that we live in, we are kind of confused between like our languages. We call everything a trigger, but I think sometimes we are just annoyed or frustrated because a trigger takes you back into your past. And annoyance or frustrations is in that moment. So I feel when you know the differentiation and also the access, and you know that you hold the key to the door or the window, yeah, I think that kind of releases you.
But I'm sure not every director is as good a therapist as Anurag Kashyap and would not give such analogies.
Which is why I have a therapist, ma'am. I cannot rely on my directors and my co-actors. Sometimes I can't rely on myself.
Right.
So I do need that help. And I am not afraid to say that I need help. I'm not afraid to say I don't know. And that is very empowering, I feel.
So I work in Germany as a journalist, and we have an on-site psychologist, especially for people who are in newsrooms, who are, who have to deal with footage of war and children dying of hunger and blood and everything. It does impact you. Either you get really immune, which is also not a very good sign, or you start getting depressed looking at that. But the backup is that you have an on-site psychologist. I don't think the film industry has anything of that sort. And coming to the numbers, Niha, you've been extremely active in this field. When I was researching numbers, in India, there is 1 psychiatrist to 1 lakh people. Now, we keep saying, go and seek help, go and see a therapist, but if there is 1 psychiatrist to 1 lakh people, how do we seek help?
Yeah, I think there are many challenges at that level. It's actually 1 lakh, 1 psychiatrist to 1 lakh patients. So people who actually need mental health and not the general population. So I think statistically speaking, we've got to like really wake up to the fact that the mental health challenge has arrived and is sort of really, as the floodgates, as Umra mentioned. So it's really, India's got 1/3 of the world's depressed, suicide and addiction cases. Suicide is the single largest cause of death in the age of 15 to 29. It's not road accidents, it's not any of those other challenges. It really is, and so mental health challenges are getting younger. Challenges around addiction and digital addiction, of course, we all talk about a lot, but various kinds of addiction, all of this is becoming sort of a real problem to deal with. We're seeing across we're seeing 10-year-olds who are coming in with depression and self-harm. We're seeing people who have undiagnosed and untreated developmental disorders or ADHD and other things later struggling and then dealing with the other mental health issues. And then, of course, there's this classic of separating mental health and physical health. So I think statistically speaking, India, we say there was a 2017 report that said 200 million people with diagnosed mental health problems. It's basically every 4th person, right? So in every home, somebody or the other in the course of their lifetime will deal with a mental health challenge. But mental health belongs to everybody, right? As you were saying, Rishabh, it's really, I mean, mental health is the right of everyone, and it's a spectrum. So we have to recognize that we'll bob in and out of mental health challenges, but essentially resilience and wellness is sitting in our mental health, which is sitting in our body. And we all have to take ownership of that, recognize the challenges, and then either get help from a psychiatrist or a therapist. Maybe there are total about 8,000 or 10,000 psychiatrists and therapists in the country. We're training now actively because we have large clinical services. We reach about 600 cities across India. And most of these cities don't have anybody physically located in them, and so it has to be online. So creating more talent is a really important thing. Creating policies and certification around that, so it's not just a bunch of wounded soldiers who are out there practicing as therapists, but they're also bringing their clinical expertise. So some regulation around that is important. But we have to trust ourselves, lean on our families, lean on our teachers, lean on each other, because this has got to be a community-based solution. No practitioner is ever going to come and solve it or fix it for us.
Right. You've been dealing with it not just professionally, but also in your personal life. How did you manage that when you saw people in your family dealing with mental health issues?
Yeah. Well, I'm from the 80s, and back then nobody knew what words like schizophrenia and bipolar disorder and all of this are. And so my mom had schizophrenia in the 80s, and she actually, disappeared for a period of 10 years. We spent 20 years before we even began her treatment. Today, she is doing very well. She's on one injection, totally recovered and healed, and is dealing with her life and is an active grandparent in my daughter's life. But it took 20 years. And in the course of that, what happened was we neglected my younger brother, who struggled. And he went away with her. And so he lost out of school and friends and everything that we call normal childhood. And we lost him 5 years ago. He died by suicide. And so these problems are really real. And it is these sort of stories, and I bet if you go around the room and say, how many people have seen this in their families?
Let's ask, how many of you have ever, even for a fraction of a second, had second thoughts or know of someone in your family who's had it?
If you look at, 1 degree of separation, whether it's depression, if we raise our hands to say how many of us are caregivers to somebody or the other with a mental health problem, right? And if you then say that, what is the challenge around depression, or we know that there are maybe 30, 40 million people with psychotic disorders. We know that there are 70 million people with depressive and anxiety disorders. So this is when it's diagnosed. But what if it's not diagnosed? What if we're just sitting at home, going to school, going to college, and just dealing with this in the course of our lives, right? And that's the silent battle. So I think we're all waiting to give each other and ourselves the permission to talk about it. Let's start talking about it.
So let's start. Rishabh, you've been talking to a lot of youngsters, to Gen Zs and Gen Alphas. You go to a lot of schools. What are the 3 main mental health issues that you really see that kids or youngsters are dealing with?
So I'll answer the question also. Firstly, just want to thank Barkha for having me next to a young superstar and somebody in the space. In regards to mental health, I do feel that it is very important in order to talk about it. And I think people are talking about it more than ever. The small organization that we run called IMON that works with schools essentially. In 2014, when we went to Gorakhpur for the first time, that's the first time there was a conversation on mental health that took place. So I've seen mental health boom as an industry also and as a conversation as well. Today you've got this conversation more than ever happening on stage and in drawing rooms. The problem sometimes is that there is overdiagnosis, and what is construed as a breakup can also go into clinical depression. So the idea is that if one had a breakup in school, and I had far too many of them, but when that happened, it wasn't rushing to your therapist necessarily. So what is also important to state, I think, because of the stage and the platform that we are at, is that it is a real problem. It is a pressing issue. It's a gremlin of our times. But at the same point in time, overdiagnosis, and that also thinking that everybody is a victim, and then saying that, why are we building, and I often say this, that we're building a Pookie generation, and a generation full of Pookies, which is fine, which is nice, it's sweet for Gen Z and Gen Alpha. But the idea that we're building a victim mindset and we're not building necessarily a resilient mindset. And I think that's why it's also very important to see this problem from an Indian context. It's a universal problem, but it's a very different solution that is offered in the West through psychiatry, and a very different issue when it comes to India. So of course there are pressing issues like bipolar disorder. There are issues that young people are facing in schools and colleges and all across, and they're very well documented. What isn't documented is the fact that this sometimes gets misused. Mental health becomes an excuse, and then you've got a generation, like I said, which is using this in a way which might be other than what it was intended for. And so that's also a real problem that needs to be dealt with per se. But the 3 things that you said in terms of school, I think one is bipolar disorder. That is something that's very common that I do see in young people. But that's also because, and one must understand, it's the prefrontal cortex that's developing. It's an impressionable young mind that is there. Therefore, your hormones are changing, your body is changing, and therefore, what can be construed as a bipolar disorder is actually something just happening to your body at that point in time, which is what I'm trying to say. We're getting counselors, we're getting psychiatrists, but the thing is that are we trying to see this from making them feel that, look, there's something that is fundamentally wrong with you, vis-a-vis this is something that has happened biologically, and which is why you can deal with it slightly differently from just going to a therapist. So that's the context I wanted to give. Also, I must say, because we're talking about India, the very first mention of mental health it's not a Western concept. It's a very much Indian concept. Sometimes parents don't yet accept it in households. The Charaka Samhita was the first book, which comes from the Agniviksha Samhita. That was the first book where you had mental health actually mentioned. So the fact that mental health is fundamentally an Indian thing that is spoken about since centuries, but the only thing is the context of seeing this is very different. Backstage we were talking about doctor-client confidentiality. Now in the West, it is compulsory in order to have doctor-client confidentiality. Even for an underage patient. Even in India, it's a compulsory thing. If you go and ask a psychiatrist, they will say this is a mandatory thing. I'm not saying that it shouldn't be mandatory, but just perhaps another perspective. The perspective being that India is a familial society. Today, a 16-year-old who's in India versus a person who's in the West. A person in the West is told saying, go and fend for yourself. Take care of yourself, get a roof above your head, get a job, etc., etc. Till date, turned 34 this year, my mom calls me up and says, Beta, khana khaya ki nahi? Now, the thing is, India is yet a deeply familial society. Your parents know a lot about you. Your parents will care about you till the time it's, from cradle to grave. So, what basically I'm trying to say is that a person who's 16 years of age in India, if they're running away from their family and going to the therapist, that's another thing altogether. But if they're not running away from the family and going to the therapist, why can't the therapist go to the family also, involve them, and try to solve the problem? Now, even Jung and Freud commented about this. But the thing is that up until the time we look at this from an Indian lens and try to see that India is a familial society, a lot of the problems that are there today, one is overdiagnosis, second is the fact that, we're solving these issues giving Western medication or Western solutions. So all of that must change, and I think it's about time that we start looking at it and make texts such as the Charaka Samhita a part of core curriculum per se.
Is that possible, Niha?
Absolutely, it's the way it should be. I mean, we have to not locate the problem in a person and say, let's fix this person. We have to look at all the factors that have contributed towards those challenges. Often they are biological, they are social, they are psychological. It's to do with our upbringing, our environments, pollution, green spaces. All of these things impact our mental health. And so as you look at this, we cannot continue to just adopt a Western biomedical model and say, have this medicine, do this, these 5 types of therapies will fix this. It's really about understanding context. What is the cultural context of that person and their family, and tap into that, right?
Yeah, even the definition of mental health, according to the West and Western psychiatry, is the absence of illness. The absence of illness is when you are supposed to be mentally fit, when you don't have any illness. But in India, it is based on Santosh, Sukh and Anand, and that is perpetual state of happiness. That happiness is is something that is joy continuously that you feel. So the very definition and understanding of mental health as it exists in the West and the East is fundamentally different. Yeah. But the problem is that if you are trying to solve an issue, it's like us going out there and saying that yoga karo, meditation karo, and all the problems that are there in your life will go away. The guy who is 16 is like, I don't have time for meditation and yoga out there because I need to care about so many other issues. Right. Not saying that meditation and yoga won't work there. It's worked beautifully.
But feeling low every time does not mean depression necessarily. No. And that is what you have to understand. What was that one point where you realized that ab to therapy leni hai mujhe, I need to step out?
Thank you. This is such an amazing question. I didn't go to therapy for any problem. I went to therapy because I firmly believed my family needed help and I will be role model. Only when I got into the therapist chair, I said, Arey bhai sahab, so many khud ka problem. But that was the realization. And I feel sometimes it's absolutely okay to be brave for your family. It's absolutely okay to be brave for your friends, for your community. Like the numbers that you just spoke of and the numbers that you agreed to are astounding numbers. If you have 1 lakh patients and 1 therapist, right? I'm talking about the time when we went through COVID and it was a particularly rough time for most people, and the kind of change we were seeing, because the kind of social adaptation was different at that point, even for like the new kids, the kids who were in school and whatnot. And it was particularly a tough time because a lot of death by suicide cases were being reported and we were hearing about them. And I guess there was something inside me that spoke to me deeply, and I said, I want to go speak to one of these NGOs and I want to certify myself and understand what do I need to do when I got a call. So I think it's really this whole mental health conversation that we are having is that change that can happen when we collectively choose to change, see, be aware as a society. Because at some place where I was, maybe I'll be able to see someone who is. So can we communicate? Can we build that? Can we empower ourselves in order to empower those who do not have that immediate access? Just for them to know that they perfectly belong. This is their society as much as it is of those who are reformed.
You know, I was in the audience when the session with Mr. Birla and his daughter Ananya, and he said it's like diabetes. In the family, somebody could have diabetes, and then you go to the doctor and you get it sorted, right? And it's the same thing here. So why make such a fuss around it? On my flight from Germany to India, I was watching Karthik Calling Karthik. मैंने अभी तक नहीं देखी थी. That came out in 2010. And I remember back in the day, a friend of mine who'd gone to see the movie, he came back and said, पता नहीं क्या था यार, सस्पेंस थ्रिलर तो कुछ था नहीं, शुरू से तो मालूम था हमें कि वो खुद को फोन कर रहा है. So there were so many people who didn't realize that the idea of the movie was to raise awareness about mental illness. 15 years later, we've talked a lot. A lot of celebs have come out and spoken very candidly about it. And awareness हो गया. Now want to know, बात कर लिया, awareness हो गया, solutions कहाँ हैं? Of course, एक problem तो यही है, infrastructure नहीं है, right? If we have only one doctor to 1 lakh patients, that one doctor cannot talk to all those 1 lakh. So obviously, there would be a huge gap. I don't know how many more years it would take to create that kind of infrastructure. Until that happens, what are the solutions that we could work on? Family support, like you said, but what if the family is the problem? So let's talk about some solutions and just collect some solutions, Rishabh.
No, I don't know about solutions. I think for solutions, you should start in that order. Yeah. But
Yeah, for solutions, maybe from here.
I think, we all recognize there's no one size fits all, and we cannot keep waiting to go to the doctor, right? And so we have to be able to solve for things in our settings. So in the homes, in school, classrooms, at the dining table, normalizing conversations, opening it up, creating safe spaces so people don't feel judged, blamed, shamed, and embarrassed about owning their reality and truth, right? We're able to talk about it. Teachers are equipped to be able to recognize signs of distress. School management is investing in counselors to come in and help people. Where young people are training as mental health first aiders, right? Suicide prevention programs exist, mental health first aiders programs, so we can help each other, right? Yes. So how do you create communities of care and support wherever you might be? You look at workplaces. We today work with over 150 corporates. They try and do mental health solutions for not just the employees but also their families. But how can we actually help using apps, using online tools and resources also to put easy access in the hands of people? So 90% of the work can happen even before you get to a psychiatrist, right? You can support each other, you can get information, credible information from the right sources, right? Not just randomly chat GPTing something.
Precisely,
So
I wanted to come to
get-
that.
Yeah.
Because I'd been to a lot of campuses and I realized that a lot of them told me that we talk to ChatGPT in the evening. Whenever they're heartbroken, they want to know from ChatGPT कि अब आगे क्या करना है. And there have been cases where generative AI has told them कि कुछ भी नहीं हो पा रहा है तो जाओ मर जाओ. So you can't really rely on that kind of information. How do you create awareness on that कि this app ये वाला सही है, ये वाला गलत है?
I think we have to also recognize that we're talking about depression, but actually the problem is of loneliness. It's of lack of connection. If we could go and talk to our parents safely and comfortably without feeling a backlash, we would do that, right? But oftentimes those circumstances don't allow for that. In homes where there may be certain challenges, that is why a lot of people are turning to technology as well. And at the same time, technology, of course, is built to try and take you away in any direction that you choose to. So it's quite dangerous because there's no filters, there's no perspective, there's no context. I think it's just about recognizing that we have a sense of agency and a responsibility to ourselves to be able to get help. And we all know at what stage we need help outside of us, from a family member or a friend, and at what stage usse bhi kuch nahi ho raha hai and you need to get specialist help. There are enough psychiatrists and therapists out there to be able to start trying to build that access. Now, it may not be in terms of sort of ongoing care in the optimum way in which it is needed. But the idea is that when you need help, do you take the first step? 80% of the journey is that first step. 20% is the rest of the entire journey of actually navigating care.
It's the first step that's
and then
the
you
most
identify,
difficult.
do I need therapy? Do I need a psychiatrist? Do I need medication? What is my diagnosis? What is the challenge? Maybe there is no diagnosis.
Right.
Maybe I'm just dealing with traumas and you'll work through it.
Right. Rishabh's been trying to pitch in.
No. I just want to give an alternative perspective to the same thing, saying that sometimes it's the family that is the problem, and sometimes it is the phone that is the problem. So the thing is that the phone is, most of the times, at least this is what I've seen in whether it's Gen Z or Gen Alpha or even millennials for that matter, is that we've grown up in a digital reality. It's a simulated world where essentially I feel sometimes are like characters in a Squid Game, or we are essentially pawns on a chessboard. And it is the digital dopamine that keeps us alive. And the reason why I mention this is because it's echo chambers. The algorithm works in that way. So if you're going to see reels of depression, or you're going to see reels of people being unhappy, then it's just going to be one after the other after the other. Olden times when you didn't have reels, you had Sonu Nigam songs, and you were wondering Kal Ho Na Ho. But the only thing is, from there, you would jump onto a Govinda movie, or you would jump onto some other Tom Cruise film, and you would get out of the loop. Unfortunately, the algorithm doesn't allow you to come out of the loop. And because the algorithm then feeds you in that manner, therefore the solution for this is just normal conversation with, perhaps like you mentioned, family. Unless, of course, you're running away from family, then having a conversation with a friend or family is much better than ChatGPT. So I'm just providing the alternative context to it. And the one small... Yeah, sorry, go on. And then I'll jump in. No, because the other thing that I just quickly wanted to mention is that you said that what is the solution to the problem? The solution to the problem, I don't have a ready-made solution, but I do know that as society sometimes, one needs to deal with grief differently. I'll share a small anecdote. The closest person to me in my family is my grandfather, and he passed in 2022. When he passed, my grandmother, who'd stayed with him for about 60 years, everybody came home to pay their respects, and everybody went to her and said, "Aapke saath bahut kharab hua. Can you, how did this happen?" So the grandmother has to recount the same horrific experience, not once, but 60 times or 70 times to the 70 people who come and grieve. I didn't shed a tear because I didn't think it was necessary at that point in time, and I didn't feel it until date. I have not. But every second conversation at home sometimes, when we talk about things, it's about my grandfather. But the idea that because I did not grieve, so society will think, saying that up until the time he started crying, that basically means he's not come to terms with grief. Or let's make sure that the grandmother recounts the same experience for 60 times, only then, and completely oblivious to the fact that the individual on the other side is being made to recount probably the worst experience of her life.
Because that one person is only doing it once. They don't know about the other 59, right?
So what I'm trying to say in this is, जब therapist आपको पूछता है तो और बताओ मुझे और बताओ इसके बारे में और बताओ. मैं क्या बोलना चाहता हूँ, saying it's not sometimes necessary. Sometimes giving space, and therefore academic study. I am not academically qualified. The ones who are the academic study of how to solve this issue. Our Upanishads speak about this. The Chandogya Upanishad speaks about how food also impacts the mind. The purity of your food will impact the mind. We eat 3 meals a day. 3 meals a day is not an Indian concept. But we are told saying 3 baar khana khao, breakfast, lunch and dinner. This did not come from the Vedas, it came from Victorian England. When you had, no, but it's true. It's true. And it came from Victorian England, where essentially you had the Industrial Revolution, because of which you had factory workers. You had to have breakfast in the morning, lunch and then dinner. technically what we called ekahara, or what Jainism calls ekadashi, or what is called akanitika in Buddhism, is essentially eating once a day. And now we call it OMAD. So the thing is that essentially, if we look at problems just from our lens, we'll find solutions per se, and there's a change in lens that we need to put. That is what I'm trying to say. And the change in lens is not just an Indian lens, but also societal lens, where when somebody dies, perhaps let's stop asking them, saying, "To bahut bura hua aapke saath. Hua kaise?"
Yeah. So next time you do that, you have that in your mind. Kubra, you wanted to say something.
No,
If you haven't
I
lost
just
the
wanted
thread.
to add to both our wonderful panelists here that as a society, sometimes we're like so focused on looking what's wrong with the society itself that we rarely ever turn the mirror towards ourselves. Like it happens to me, and I catch myself in those subconscious moments sometimes when I'm watching reels and I see something about narcissism, hot topic for the day. And it's so interesting. It's so easy for me to say, they are narcissist. He is narcissist. She is narcissist. Turn that towards your own self and say, what about this do I identify in me? Forget about giving problems to other people. You will recognize how many problems you're giving yourself. I feel one of the biggest solutions that we can provide to ourselves before reaching the 20% is to be perfectly honest with ourselves and to say that this doesn't make me happy. This is something I don't know. And look at everything from a curiosity point of view rather than a solution point of view. Okay, now I have read this and I will fix narcissism. No. Look at it and slowly try to understand how can you relieve yourself from it. Like, I remember going to this homeopathic doctor once a long time ago, for my cat in fact, and she gave the white pills and said that often we associate, disease with like just the problems that are. But I want to give your cat this medicine so that she can be at the lack of dis-ease. So I can make her feel easy with these tablets. So I'm not affecting the problem, I'm trying to make her free from the problem. But identify it so that you can make it free.
Right. And not only for yourself, have empathy also for others.
It will happen if you are kind to yourself. The problem is that we are so kind to others and shit with ourselves. And it's easy for us to be shit with ourselves. And I look around this room and I'm so happy to see people in this room who are at an impressionable age and stage in their life where they do hold the capacity to look within. So for how long are we going to start passing on the baton to other people? Instead, look within, because I truly feel that joy that we are looking for is here inside. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. You cannot sit in your loneliness and depression, and you will start finding more answers, and only through answers can we be able to help each other.
Very well put. And our time is actually up, but before we go, Niha, everything that Kubra said, your book actually deals with all of that. There are stories, lived stories of women who've gone through it. Very briefly, if you could just tell us one story that left a mark with you. There's one story that you say that you all need to really read it.
I think stories really heal, and every time you share, somebody else will share as well, because we're all waiting for that permission. This book is called Homecoming. It's mental health journeys of resilience, healing and wholeness. But the idea is it's 11 women who have come together, because we heal in tribes and we heal in communions. So it's 11 women's stories. And in those stories is a psychiatrist, is an entrepreneur, is a philanthropist, is a teacher, but who have also dealt with severe mental illness and what the stories of their lives have been. So the idea is not to just look at the mental health aspect of somebody's life and label this person bipolar, OCD, ADHD. Ab to wo hi hai, right? Instead, let's look at the whole person as a mother, as an entrepreneur. I mean, I'm here. I've shared a little bit of my story, and there are so many phenomenal stories. There's Zainab's story, for example, who grew up in the chawls of Juhu in the trans community, and what kind of challenges, traumas, rape, abuse, molestation, all of that have been seen in those communities, and how they have dealt with it. These stories are really powerful. Or Dr. Kavita Arora, who's a psychiatrist herself, but was a child carer to a parent with schizophrenia, and is now a child psychiatrist. And these are stories of resilience, but also of giving back. So inspiring.
Right. I was reading an excerpt from the book yesterday, and I realized it made me think of my mother. Every time our mothers would say, "Jab tumhari umar mein hoga, tab pata chalega." Whether it was for lack of the vocabulary, whether it was that they were not able to figure out what was going on with them at that age, or whether they wanted to protect their children and say, "Ki abhi there's no need to tell them what we are going through." But the fact remains that they would never talk about their mental health, and that is the kind of thing that this book really talks about. So please go ahead and read the book, and as you said, share stories, which is most important. And I need to ask you, marathon it is, what does it do to your mental health? You just go on. I was just telling backstage that ours is the only panel because of which you get a half-an-hour break, and that's about it. How do you do that?
With a very sore throat and a lot of passion. The time flies by when you're having great conversations, and I think we've been having those today, including this one, which I was listening to from backstage, and I cannot thank all three of you enough for being so candid, for being so direct. It's been wonderful to hear. And before we let all four of you go, we count you as the change makers of the year. We've been recognizing and honoring change makers, all day. So if we can please have our awards on stage, this award from me, very humbly presented to all of you. Okay. To you first, because you make the most noise. Let's have a big round. Okay, guys, now you can't let me down. You have to be the best audience ever, right? And this is for our wonderful moderator, Isha. Wasn't she great? Wasn't she great? Yes. And Rishabh, whose new book you must absolutely read. You will be shocked at what you discover about influencers particularly. And to Niha for sharing and bearing your personal experiences with such courage. Thank you. Wow. Can I please request all four of you to just come up for a photograph? And I would like you to show them some love, because this has been one of the most difficult conversations to have. Thank you so much. A little louder, a little louder, a little louder, right? Yes. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Bye, darling. Thank you.